Hi, I'm Meta Spencer. Today, let's have a schmooze day, shall we? A schmooze day for me is one of those days when I don't dictate what the agenda is going to be. We find out what's on people's minds and we see if we're all thinking about anything in common. And so far, we've been exploring the question already, checking each other out because these people are not people who've ever met before. And we're going to have a conversation that I think will probably have something to do with climate change. So we'll see, because everybody's free to talk about what's on their minds. In Ottawa, there's Zach Jacobson, who's, I think he and Art Hunter know each other through the Canadian Association for the Club of Rome. I think that's the way, is that called it? Canadian?
That's correct.
Right? Good. Canadian Association for the Club of Rome. And I sort of belong, but I have never been to a single meeting yet. That's all right. These guys have been putting on conversations for a very long time and know a lot about some of the issues that the Club of Rome has always focused on. He's been working for a number of years as a mathematician for the Canadian government, and the most recent assignment was with Health Canada. So we might turn to health issues.
I have a connection with your group that you probably don't know about, and that is Paul Werbos and I are old war buddies from the early from the early wars of neural networks.
Wow,
way back in the 70s and
he's
80s.
He's a fascinating man. So I'll be glad to know how you know each other, more about that work. Yeah. Okay, in Washington is Anastasia Karamova, who's been on the show before. She is an immigrant to the US from Russia, and she was a journalist in Russia. But how long have you been in the US now, Anastasia?
It's been 5 years.
5 years. So you're practically an old stock American or something by now. And you do a lot of work bringing together activists who are Russians who are in favor of democracy and putting them in touch with people in the US who are policymakers. So that's wonderful. And I'll come back to talking about my current fascination with Russia with respect to climate change, if you don't mind. Adam Wynn is my assistant. He's an absolutely indispensable part of my life nowadays, does everything for me that I can't do by myself. And so thank you so much, Adam, for sitting in here and just for being the guy that you are, who's so helpful. And in Ottawa also is Art Hunter, who's an engineer, and he's now seated in his own home. And I saw him before in the basement of this house, believe it or not, because the house he lives in is one that is, what do you call it? Sustainable equipment. Describe how you call this, because
it's a fossil fuel free home, which is a microgrid as well. It's standalone energy. I generate all the energy that I use, and any excess I sell to Hydro One.
Well, it's a beautiful environment here, and I saw your basement, which was extremely interesting, but you wouldn't call it a swanky looking place like the beautiful stairwell and all this background. But are you in your kitchen or what? Looks like
I'm in my basement, and that's a fake background.
Oh, so you are in your basement. Okay. Well, I was thinking, here's this background. Looks like a microwave oven on the wall, but I didn't quite see what it might be. But it's a basement, guys, and he does wonderful things in that basement with the climate. So it looks like we're all at the moment have some interest in climate issues, among other things. But of course, you're free to change the subject to whatever is really on your mind. Oh, you've changed to another room. Well, you have good taste in furnishings, I will say. Very beautiful surroundings, Art. Appreciate that. Okay, now listen, I want to start by asking Anastasia something, because at 5 a.m. I couldn't sleep. I was awake. So I got up and I began to look on the internet on my iPad for Greenpeace in Russia, because I realized I'm in touch with lots and lots of people on all of the 6 global issues that Project Save the World addresses. Every day I do a contact with somebody, but I don't have contacts much in Russia at all. And especially I'm thinking Russia is the most perplexing place when it comes to conversations about global warming. Because over the years, I've had a lot of contacts in Russia, more in the past than recently. But I have found, initially my friends had never heard of global warming, and then I would explain it to them, and they sort of looked blank. And then there wouldn't, there's almost no contact with people who are engaged in issues of research on climate change, and it's really hard to find people. But then I've had other contacts more recently with old friends who want to actually be deniers or something. I don't quite understand their mentality, but old friends who are politically, I would have thought, somewhat compatible with me, but they have no interest in the question of global warming. And here you just had, for example, this past summer, the biggest wildfires ever. Your wildfires were bigger than all the other wildfires in the world put together. And that was a summer that was hell, because everybody was burning forest fires and stuff. And the Russians actually seem oblivious to it. Now, please start off by explaining to me what I don't understand. What's going on there that makes people not worry? And am I really crazy? Maybe I just happen to have really weird sampling of friends who don't look like anybody else that you know. But if you can explain to me the official and unofficial public opinion feelings about climate change among Russians, I would really be happy.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, I want to remind our listeners that Russia is actually 4th biggest contributor to global warming. So Russia does play an important role in this negative process. I think the reason why so many Russians are either indifferent regarding this topic, or they have doubts if global warming actually is a thing, partially because same with vaccines. People were poisoned with propaganda for decades. At this point, nobody trusts the government. So nobody trusts media, nobody trusts the information coming even from international organizations. So people just lost trust at a very large scale. They don't trust the vaccines, they don't trust the science, and they don't trust the global warming. They don't believe they don't believe researchers. And especially once this topic, once the government started discussing this topic, people became even more skeptical. So that is very sad. At the same time, I need to point out that actually Russians are very concerned about the environment, just at a different scale. For example, the most massive protests, especially outside of Moscow, were all about environmental issues over the past 2 years. For example, people don't like that there is so many trash around their cities, or they don't like that the government wants to destroy the park to build new apartment complex. So people go to the streets to protest against this like very particular targeted topic. I think it's just a little bit harder for people to relate to something that seems to be like a bigger concept, something that is slightly more abstract to them, you know. Plus, Russia has much more, it's like the economy is much more difficult than it is in the US. For example, many American people these days are concerned by the inflation rates. But for Russians, 8% inflation per year is nothing, right? It's like we have inflation 10% or more every year, and salaries do not keep up with the inflation, and overall the population is pretty poor. So I just think that people have many other urgent concerns when it comes to providing for families, and when it comes to access to some basic things such as healthcare, which is universal in Russia, but still, especially during COVID, it's really hard to get treatment. So yeah, I just think that there are so many things on Russian people's minds that it's really hard to create a sense of urgency when it comes to global warming.
Well, you know, I would have thought when you mentioned that the government has become interested in and is talking about global warming. Well, even there, I don't think that's quite as much as you'd expect. They didn't, I think Putin didn't go, or maybe I don't know how many people went to Glasgow, but that's a sign of not taking something very seriously. I got the impression that they weren't very well represented there. So I would understand it if they had been, you know, all the time talking about how global warming is a serious thing. Then if people would react against the government, they would say, well, no, it's not so serious. That would be logical. But neither the government nor the people seem to have much concern about it. And even people that I think, you know, would be in North America for sure, they would be activists, and, you know, but they're anything but now. So anyway, Adam, you have your hand up. You don't have to.
Yes, one of our viewers would like to know about the role of censorship in Russia when it comes to climate change activism.
Yeah.
Is that a concern, and to what extent is censorship an issue for scientists that are reporting on climate change related subjects?
I actually don't think that there is a strong climate change movement in Russia. I don't think that there are too many activists who work in this field. Greenpeace does some research studies, but I think most of the efforts when it comes to activism, most of the efforts are focused around more local and specific topics. But overall, censorship is a big thing. Access to high quality information is pretty limited these days in Russia. And I wanted to respond to, sorry, what's that?
Oh, I was just going to ask, what about Siberia and the permafrost problems there having to do with global warming?
Yeah, I didn't spend that much time in that part of the country. Overall, I have an impression that Siberian people are way more social responsible and active than the rest of the population. I've heard that they had some protests too over the past few years. Not sure if it had something to do with specifically global warming, but I also know that for them it's like their first-hand experience, because the forests, the wildfires are happening almost every year. So in Moscow region, it happened once 11 years ago. And unfortunately, societal memory is kind of short. You know, the attention span is not that good. So people already forgot how terrible it was and how many older people died because of the air pollution, because of the forest fires. And in Siberia, it's something that happens every year. So I assume that they might be more concerned about this issue.
Yeah. Well, now also there was about 5 years ago, there was a big problem with peat fires. Some peat caught fire, and apparently once that gets started underground, it's really hard to put it out. So I remember people that I'd heard about were, the smoke. Apparently, there's a lot of smoke that comes up, but I don't think that was Siberia. It was closer to Moscow, wasn't it?
Yes, it was happening in more like Central European region part of the country. So yeah, it was actually you are absolutely correct. It was peat, but then it spreads and becomes a forest fire. I actually volunteered with Greenpeace when I lived in Moscow, and we created volunteer firefighters teams. And we noticed that the government employees, government firefighters, they didn't have proper equipment and they were not properly trained to address this issue.
Well, how do you, I don't know whether anybody knows, how do you put out peat fires if you do? I mean, I don't know how they get started in the first place. And then once they're burning, I don't know what the proper treatment is. Do any of you know that?
Well, I assume that this kind of fires is also related to global warming. So as long as it gets warmer, it happens more and more often. Overall, Greenpeace does special research. They use special cameras in like this space shots from the space. So you can see the map with how would you say it? Like it's basically like heat map. So you can see how the surface of the Earth is, how hot it is. So you can see where it starts, even if it's not visible yet. You can already tell with the special like space shots that here the soil is already pretty hot. And if it's early in the spring, you need to address this issue right away. You need to start like digging the soil and putting water in the soil. Because in the spring, you have a lot of water in the fields because the snow melts. But then the Russian government does not do that. They're too lazy or, I don't know, don't have enough resources. And they wait for May or June or July until it gets like a real problem, very visible. And you can also smell it in the air.
Yeah.
But it's already too late to address it.
So
okay. Are you smelling smoke in the air or diesel kind of oily kind of things in the air? Because peat fires, I think, release a lot of methane.
Yeah, it has very distinct smell. Yeah, for sure. I would describe it more like oily smell. Right? Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Well, that's.
Let me just add that in Canada, we have a mountain of coal in the Yukon that was struck by lightning probably shortly after the ice age, and it's been burning there for centuries.
No,
still is.
Really?
Oh yes, and I have flown over it a few times, and it's a wonderful navigational beacon because you can see it for miles and
the smoke. You see
absolutely.
smoke.
Yeah, and the mountain is on fire.
My word. Well, this.
And how do you put a mountain out? I don't know. That's hard.
Yes. And I see my notion of physical reality is obviously deficient because I thought to burn you had to have oxygen, but obviously not, because you can make charcoal, and the nature of biochar or charcoal is stuff that's burned in the absence of oxygen. So how can you burn something? I guess if you could bake something in an oven that doesn't have any.
That's exactly how they do it, Meta. You raise the temperature and you get the material to outgas, it's called, and what you got left over is charcoal.
And what outgasses is a lot of methane, among other things.
Yes.
And then it's hard to put out or impossible. I mean, have they even tried, or have they given up hope of putting that mountain out?
Well, nobody's even attempted. I mean, how do you even start? Now, if you had an atmospheric river and you could direct it, Now there's an
That
opportunity.
would do it.
Yeah, well, we just had a conversation Sunday about atmospheric rivers. We had our monthly town hall, and it was a term that I had never heard before. So people began to enlighten me about atmospheric rivers.
No,
My goodness.
well, the term atmospheric river has been around for at least a decade, that when I first heard it. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Well, I hadn't heard it, and that just
I've only
shows.
heard it recently.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Anastasia, for telling me, and I'll probably be in touch with you with how to find people in Russia who are not climate change deniers. I want to be in touch with those people, and there are some really important people doing research on the East Siberian Sea, where the clathrates are coming up out of the. It's a very shallow area of the sea because of the shelf there, and the methane is just boiling up. It looks like clouds. I saw a video of a ship going through that region, and it was like a plane going through clouds, just white everywhere. So it's very, very threatening, very ominous that much methane is coming up, and that people want to forget about it is the scariest thing that I know of, because if we're going to survive, we've got to do something. Okay, guys, I've hijacked the conversation to begin with, which is what I promised never to do. Start directing you guys to talk about what I'm interested in. Tell me what you're interested in.
So we'll interject. Abraham Whitesfeld, one of our viewers, has a question for the panelists here.
All right. What is it?
Should the third world countries simply stop the extraction of oil resources? Of course, those countries often use the revenue to alleviate poverty, but that's simply self-defeating. What are your thoughts on that?
All right.
Well, that's very interesting. I think we, as a species, really don't have any options here. We've got to stop burning that very complex fossil molecule, no matter what its source. We have to go and change to alternate energy forms if we are to survive. And if it was optional, then the politicians would be busy beavering away, coming up with all sorts of rules and regulations and things to do, and the United Nations would be able to burst into action and get unilateral agreement on what to do. But we've gone through this process called Conference of the Parties 26 times, and each time we get commitments and agreements and the ways to proceed and how to treat the third world, and et cetera, which everybody signs up and agrees and says, aren't we a bunch of jolly good folks? And they all go away and do nothing. And that's the problem that we're in, that we cannot get anything concrete actually happening. Making plans is dead easy. I can make a plan in 5 minutes, but I can forget it in about 3 seconds. And governments are very good at doing that. And they have proved that over and over again. So when it comes to the question, what should we do about the third world? I'm sorry. It's not that we should do anything. The third world's going to do whatever in the world they want to do, and whatever the markets are driving them. And so the real controllers are the billionaires, are the oil companies, the fossil fuel industry. They're the folks who had the biggest contingent at COP26. I think it was 550 odd people there to make sure that yet again, the world would come together, come up with plans and do nothing. And they succeeded yet again.
Yet again, they succeeded. I keep on saying it's a voice in the wilderness medicine. hate me for this, that alternate energies aren't enough. You're going to have to use a lot of nuclear energy too to decarbonize the world. And but all of these are technological things that have to be done, things that you need solutions to lower the temperatures in the Arctic. That's the kind of geoengineering that David Keith talks about. I think you need to do a lot of throwing iron in the ocean to make it absorb carbon dioxide. Although there's worry that will cause a hydrogen sulfide problem. I think it probably won't, but that would be getting into the weeds of the technical question. I find myself thinking that the world actually may be almost ready to change its mind on a couple of things, but then something like COP26 happens and nothing happens, and I get discouraged again.
Yeah, and I suspect as well that the reality is that there's a much bigger problem, and most people don't want to talk about it, and that's population. Because there's so many of us, our demands for all our Earth resources exceed the capacity of the planet. We treat our oceans, the atmosphere, and the land as garbage dumps. We don't make any serious attempts to replenish the forest. Lots of talk about it, but again, how much is actually done? Not very much. And the same thing with the fisheries and what have you. I do tip my hat to some individual organizations who are very successful in saving the gorillas and what have you. I think they're just fabulous folks because they're working quite independent of government, other than government's interest with the gorillas in making money from tourism. And other than that, if there wasn't that financial gain, the gorillas would be doomed, I'm sure. I think the reality is that there's too many of us, and we're too interested in maintaining and expanding our comforts. And in the meantime, there's been 100 years of the oil industry being integrated into every facet of human endeavor, and switching to an alternate fuel is certainly encouraged, but it's really not an easy thing to do.
If you had to bet, if you had to invest in either nuclear or solar or wind, which would you put your money on? I would invest in solar or wind, because if nothing else, it takes too long to build these power plants. They won't be ready in anything. We need within the next 5 years, big switchover. And so what we need to do is build quicker and quicker and quicker wind and solar. No?
It won't happen. It won't happen.
There's just not enough energy that way. No. Art's right.
If you're in a hurry, the only thing you do is the things that you can do quickly.
Well, and hence that's the dilemma, is it not? What do we do from here going forward? And it seems that people are just starting to wake up to the term adaptation, that people really have never really understood what mitigation meant, or if they did, it's something that's going to happen way out in the turn of the 21st century, and there's nothing we need now do now. We'll just kick the can down the road and maybe sprinkle a little money around the edges, and that'll keep the voters happy. In the meantime, the fossil fuel industry is absolutely delighted because they can keep their profits flowing and in fact expand them. And it's a total disaster.
They find the fossil fuel industry finds a way to make a profit on anything. If only we could get them interested in building nuclear plants. They got the money. You're worried about it costing too much? Oh, they have the money. Anyway, there are plans and there are hopes that they can bring enough, some nuclear and some solar and some wind. The question isn't one or the other, Meta. It's kind of all and in the meantime, they're going to have to find, I would say, natural, not artificial ways to get carbon dioxide out of the air. That's the thing I'm worried about mainly right now, and cooling the planet. I think that they have no idea adaptation. They have no idea what they're adapting to. A 3-degree world is, well, on the one hand, it's inevitable. On the other hand, I'm not sure it's survivable. So I see desperation. Somebody said on TV Ontario, and I thought she was brilliant, the world is absolutely out of perfect solutions.
You see,
but we're going to have to try a whole lot of little solutions.
I think what one of the things, Meta, you're probably not aware, but I'm also responsible for the Canadian Association for the Club of Rome for our weekly Zoom series, and we're coming up to about our 100th now, and we've managed to attract some very good speakers on the many dimensions of climate change. And coming up, we have a speaker and whose name escapes me right now, who is I recruited him because I liked his view on population, or at least he's one of the few people who will talk on it, because that's just so sensitive that it touches on just too many nerves. He starts off saying, how big a population can the world maintain and sustain? And that's where he starts. And he concludes that it's 100 million people. Now, how we get there, that's a separate matter. It means a massive population correction. And then he goes off to explain how, in his view, 100 million people in 3 cities spread throughout the globe, one in North America, one in Europe, and one in Indo-China area, and how these cities have very strict rules and regulations, and how they must let nature regain a foothold in the rest of the world, and hence humanity has a probability of surviving. Now, how's that all going to happen? That's going to be an interesting discussion, I'm sure. I mean, I've got many questions on that as well.
Well, what are your answers? Because, I mean, yes, we may just be in for some more pandemics, so maybe that'll handle it. Or if you don't like that, how about a nuclear war or two?
Yeah, I thought of that. A good nuclear winter might help. Yeah.
Well, I think there will be a lot of civil unrest. There will be war over water. There will be, of course, more pandemics. There will be a lot more drought. There will be a lot more atmospheric rivers. I mean, it goes on, and it's to the point, if we don't act immediately, it's going to get worse much faster than we're talking about. And people are just slowly waking up to that. Well, in Canada, the folks in British Columbia are saying, who knew? Why hasn't somebody done something about this? Why isn't there coordination happening at the municipal and provincial and federal levels to prevent this? Well, yes, we should get right on that, shouldn't we? Those scientists haven't been warning us for 60 years.
To be fair, hey, just as one of the scientists, let me say, this whole thing is galloping ahead faster than I expected and faster than most of the scientists I knew expected too. We're still trying to figure out. That's one of the things I'm trying to in the last couple of weeks, just exactly what is the exponent of the upward curve of carbon dioxide temperature, to say nothing of methane. But
sorry, what is that? The exponent of? Explain.
Yeah.
What you mean.
Is it going up with the time squared? Is it going up with time cubed? Time to the sixth one? All of that stuff is faster. But actually, I think what really matters is look at the Keeling curve. That's that thing that looks like they used to call it the hockey stick. It's still climbing, and you get it from the Mauna Loa Observatory. If it doesn't scare the hell out of you, then you haven't been paying attention.
We don't know the wrath of nature, and we're just really beginning to experience that now.
And she always bats last.
Yeah, and she's very good.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, on Sunday, we had the town hall, and one of the things that kind of threw me for a loop, somebody said, you people, peace activists are always talking about war. You really, if you're a peace activist, you should be talking about peace. Well, by peace, he means, flowers and square dancing and, just change the subject. Let's talk about pleasant things. And my sense is that, if your notion of peace doesn't include working to solve problems, I don't want peace because I want to solve the problems. I find that far more interesting than lying on a beach or square dancing or that sort of thing. So, but I guess it's obviously not just Russians who think that way. It's the world full of people who, even smart people, say, let's change the subject and talk about something pleasant because this is getting on my nerves.
Well, that's really unfortunate that people find it disturbing because it's been disturbing the scientific community I first became involved as a scientist in this in the 1980s. And it was well known and well understood from the IPCC first assessment review. And that is the first, cry in uniformity from scientists from around the world to the rest of the world. And that cry is still going on and it's still being ignored. And we're just getting progressively worse. And all those predictions are coming true. And
they're coming true sooner than you expected.
And faster. Very good, Jacques. That's exactly what's happening. So I'm not very optimistic that we're going to get through this, while we're square dancing and raising flowers. Mother Nature is coming at us. We're going to see more massive fires. Russia took an awful hit last fire season, and we're going to see much more, that's coming throughout the world. It's not just happening in Canada, Russia, and the USA. It's take a look at the people in Europe, and look what's happening in China too. Australia. Come on, look around the world. You don't have to read any piece of news from any part of the world, and there is disasters going on. But yet there's still people who saying, well, we've had storms there for hundreds of years. So, this is nothing new. Well, yeah.
Right. Okay. I just wrote an article for the next issue of Peace Magazine about a dozen things that are ways of actually subtracting methane and CO2 from the atmosphere. And Zach has mentioned a couple just in passing, trees and sprinkling minerals in the ocean. There are a number of others that have promise, but it looks like every one of them requires additional research massively, in order to be sure that we're not doing something terribly destructive without knowing what we're quite doing, the side effects.
The most destructive thing you can do is nothing right now.
I agree. Yes, if we've already created this mess without paying attention or doing the research on what might happen, and this is what we get for it, then it's high time for us to go ahead, and we're going to have to take some risks. Unfortunately, some of them are real risks, and we really have to think carefully about which are the ones that are the most promising and the most, I would think, irreversible. The ones that you can't undo are the ones that I would be going slow on. For example, spraying sulfur into the stratosphere. I don't know how you would take that stuff out, or mirrors in space.
Stop doing it. If you don't like what the sulfur is doing, just stop spraying. That one's easy.
How long does it take to clear?
Sorry, Adam?
How long would it take to clear if you stop spraying sulfur, for example? I imagine some compounds may be up in the atmosphere for quite a while.
Nobody knows.
Quite short-lived.
No,
you say nobody.
Now that is something you could research.
Adam, that's a A1 question. Nobody knows. For all these potential solutions, nobody really knows. And therefore, to go off, and Meta wants to go off and take some risk. Well, by the time we get around to ever doing anything about it and getting consensus that that's a reasonable thing for humans to do, nature will already be wreaking havoc in a dozen other ways. And
we saw with Project Westford in the 60s, they launched 400 million copper needles into the atmosphere, and some of them are apparently still orbiting.
Yes.
What was that for?
It was a plan to disrupt communication using radar and satellite by having clouds of copper needles. But they thought that they would be short-lived, and they got into the right atmospheric currents, and they're still up there orbiting or floating around in the high atmosphere.
Well, there's even space debris that was specifically put there and intentionally made a bunch of needles that are in orbit and used at one time. It was going to be a useful way to bounce communications off this cloud of needles. Well, that sure didn't work well. It's all spread out, and it's just how many hundreds of thousands of potential deadly spikes that can penetrate each and every satellite that happens to be passing through that orbit. And
exactly, yes, there were 480 million.
And these were unintended consequences. They were damn good ideas. Look, we can put up a nice reflective shield up there, and it failed miserably.
Look, I'm in complete agreement with you that we have every reason to be pessimistic, and I can't say I'm otherwise. I'm pretty bleak about the prospects, but I'd like for us to spend some time thinking about all the various options that are available that make some promises that they are likely to work. What would you bet on? What are the priorities of the things that we should be doing next to try to get some solution to these problems?
I can tell you the biggest one that can have any impact whatsoever is stop consumption of everything. Stop flying around, stop consuming so much food, stop living in such comfort, reduce your comfort level. Do you think that's going to fly anywhere? No, nobody's going to buy that. Advertising is alive and well, but that's what I would put my money on. The next one is, of course, find some way to depopulate, and that's very untenable to just about everybody on the planet.
Okay, now you've told us what's not going to work, and I agree with you. Those two things are not going to work. So give me some suggestion of something that will work or has a good chance of working, and maybe it won't do the whole job, but if we can do 10 or 12 of these things that might work a little bit, we might make a dent in the thing. So don't tell me anymore another single thing that won't work. Your next assignment is tell me we'll make a little bit.
I honestly think solar geoengineering and ocean fertilization, both in the deep ocean and the shallow, and putting heavy seaweed near the coast. These things, I think, are a start. And of course, stopping burning fossil fuel, I don't know how the hell. Maybe governments. It's almost like it's a government problem. As long as governments allow and encourage those fossil fuel companies to dig out that stuff, they'll do what companies do. They'll.
Okay, now we're back to talking about what won't work. I agree with you. Okay. All the things that you say won't work, they won't. Now, what will work?
I just said two things that will work.
Right now, my first full vote, I would have two different possibilities. One is brightening the clouds with, if you need to put some ships out there or little even rowboats with machines that spray salt water. That's right. That I think has some real promise. There's another promise of using iron salt aerosols which will break down methane and into CO2, basically, which is not a great thing, but it's a hell of a lot better than methane. So those are my first two voices. My votes would be, those are realistic. They could be achieved. We could even, it's not even that hard to do. So I would vote for that. Now you tell me what you would vote for that will work, Art.
I know what will work because I've been doing it for 5 years. I've electrified everything. I do not. I have a microgrid. I generate all my own power. I get all my own heat from the ground. I, in fact, drive electric vehicles.
Yeah, but are you going to say now, everybody, how are you going to get people to do it? The point is that if you depend on public opinion, that won't work. So we have to do things that will not depend on convincing the whole world to change their way of living. So I'm sorry, but your proposal won't work because you can't get people to do it. Even I live in a high-rise apartment building. You're asking me to change my living into something like you live in. I'm sorry, it can't be done. Give me something that will work.
Well, that has been signed up by a lot of people other than yourself. Obviously, you're a denier, but it works very well.
I'm a denier.
Yes, you're denying.
What do you think I'm denying?
You just told me it won't work. Of course it works. I've been doing it.
No, it won't work.
Europe. They're doing it in California. They're doing it throughout.
To change the world, you've got to get billions of people to do this, whatever it is you want done. So we'll all change our way of living and so on. You cannot get that to happen. People will not change. So no, we've got to do something that will take some of the carbon out of the atmosphere that's already there, because a dozen people with the right resources could do that. If you go to Bill Gates and say, give me some money for some ships and put some clouds in the atmosphere, that will make a difference. And you don't have to convince the rest of the world. So give me something that you can do that, 500 people with a strong energy and commitment could make a difference, a big difference. And I think cloud brightening is one, and the aerosols is another. And sprinkling the ocean with bath salt and might be another, or putting olivine on the beaches might be another. I have a dozen things that could do quite a bit.
And I don't believe in any of them. None of them will work.
Well, they actually scientifically will work if we can get them done. And the point is that they are doable.
I don't.
They're things that people could do.
I think the footprint of living in a perfectly sustainable house is wonderful, but I don't. Well, I think about 100 million people on the planet could do that, but that's part of the problem we've got. How many billions now?
Yeah, but Zach, the point was, it hasn't to be a single solution. It's one of a dozen things you can do. At least that's what I understood was the question. And it turned out that wasn't the question. It was really, is there one thing that everybody in the world can do? We can do some geoengineering and solve the problem. And I do not believe such a solution exists, because the major problem is population and consumption of resources.
They're about over.
What?
They're about over.
Okay.
We are seeing some tower renewals here in Canada, with older mid to late 20th century high-rise towers being retrofitted for to be more environmentally friendly and to reduce their carbon impacts. But that has to generally be undertaken by building management. It's much more difficult if you're in a unit in the building to do it one-off with certain parameters. I'm sure you can do it within a certain extent. And we've also seen projects like Gemini House, which converts a solid 1870s masonry building into an environmentally friendly structure that's controlled by a computer with zero or negative carbon impacts.
I think, Adam, what you're saying is absolutely true. There are many hundreds of things that can be done, many of them, of different ways of approaching things, both social as well as technical, and of course financial instruments, etc. A lot has been talked about, but nobody's doing them. And to say that none of them matter, we can just do one of these 12 geoengineering things and we don't have to do any of the rest, that does not work. It will not work. And to me, what there is some hope if in fact we can move forward as humanity to address all of them. And that includes the fires in the steppes of Russia. How in the world do you put that right? And how do we change that? It means we have to do things on mitigation. It means that we have to stop consuming. And I know Meta doesn't like that we must be able to consume at ever increasing pace and just throw some silver into the air and everything will be fine. That is not going to work.
Well, I agree that that's not going to work by itself, but you have to do all these things together.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I really don't like it, Art, when you tell me you know what I think and that you blame me for this or that. I'm sorry, but I don't believe any of the things that you say that I believe. So just lay off. Get back off, please. I'm offended. So now, Zach, it's your turn.
Oh, I couldn't No, I'm not going to follow that. I think that it's not a one or the other, but it is a many and. The only thing is getting to there is going to turn out to be well nigh, well, it may simply happen that things get so bad, the atmospheric rivers get so bad, the brush fires get so bad that in desperation, people do, or a few people with the resources do the few, probably, I'm going to guess about a dozen things like we've been talking about that can be done, I think, effectively. Will that help us survive? I don't know.
Well, the problem is we haven't been talking about those things. We've been talking about the things that are not going to work. And I think so. I'm disappointed that we haven't had a conversation that's come up with anything constructive that is hopeful. And I'm not just trying to say, let's all be wishy-washy and just hold hands and sing songs together and be hopeful in that sense. We have to actually look for realistic solutions that can be done and that do not require converting the whole entire mass of humankind to a different point of view, because that cannot be done. And we have to find solutions that a small number of people with resources could actually accomplish. So that's what I try to do with the shows that I do 3 times a week, is look for solutions. And I'll be talking to somebody next about basalt. I'll be talking tomorrow to Mark Jacobson in California about how we could switch over to a non-fossil fuel type of.
I wish you hadn't said that. He is the antithesis of anybody who wants to do anything nuclear. He thinks you can do it all with wind and solar. You cannot.
I'm not in favor of nuclear either. I think we have to.
I know you're not, but I'm sorry, you're going to be stuck with that. Desperate times, desperate measures. That's one of them.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Well, okay. We finally get down to business. It just is time for us to quit. So we could have a good conversation further about that issue, but time's up now because we've spent it all moaning. And I agree, there's a lot to moan about. So it's too bad, but we also need some real solutions. So tomorrow, listen to Mark Jacobson. That's the best I can do. See ya. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.